Clara May Whitfield threw her last $3 onto the frozen ground at Thomas Harding's boots and looked him dead in the eye. "Keep it," she said. "Buy yourself a conscience." He didn't flinch. His new wife stood in the doorway behind him, arms folded, lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. The door of the only boarding house in Coldwater Creek, Wyoming, closed with a quiet, final click, and Clara stood alone in the worst blizzard the territory had seen in 10 years. She was 28 years old. She had nowhere to go, and the snow was already past her ankles. If this story moves you, please subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The wind off the Wyoming mountains didn't ask permission. It hit Clara straight across the face the moment she turned away from Thomas Harding's door, and she gasped. Not from the cold, though the cold was savage, but from the sheer, sudden weight of understanding that she had made a catastrophic mistake. 2 days on a rattling stagecoach from Kansas City, $41 saved over 3 years of taking in laundry. One advertisement clipped from the back of the Missouri Dispatch, folded and refolded until the paper had gone soft at the creases. Widower, 2 sons, seeks capable woman of good character. Coldwater Creek, Wyoming. Serious inquiries only. She had written Thomas Harding 4 letters before he wrote back. She had memorized his final reply. Come before December. The boys need a woman's touch before winter sets in hard. She had come before December. She had come on the exact date he specified, and Thomas Harding had opened his door with a new wife at his side, a soft-faced woman from Cheyenne he'd married 3 weeks prior, and looked at Clara the way a man looks at a bill he'd forgotten he owed. "I sent a letter," he said. "I never received it." "Well," he glanced back at his wife. "Things changed. I can see that. I'm sorry for your trouble, miss. I truly am." Clara had stood on that porch for a full 10 seconds, her travel bag in both hands, the cold working through her coat, staring at the man who had summoned her across half the country and then forgotten to cancel the order. She thought about crying. She thought about screaming. She thought about the $41. Then she set her bag down, reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the $3 she had left after paying for the coach fare, and threw them at his feet. "Keep it," she said. "Buy yourself a conscience." The door closed. Clara picked up her bag and walked back into the storm. Coldwater Creek was not a large town. It had one main road, a general store, a livery stable, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, a saloon that didn't bother to double as anything, and a train station at the far end of the road that handled passengers 3 times a week when the weather permitted. The weather had not been permitting for the past 4 days. Clara walked with her head down and her bag pressed against her chest. She counted the buildings as she passed them. She was looking for a sign that said hotel or rooms or even boarding. She found the general store first, a wide, square building with yellow lamplight pushing through the frost on the windows. She pushed the door open. The warmth hit her like a wall. She stood in the doorway for one grateful second, letting it move over her face, and then a voice from behind the counter said, "Close that door, would you, miss? You're letting all the heat out." She closed the door. The man behind the counter was somewhere in his mid-50s, with a thick gray mustache and the particular expression of a man who had decided his opinion of you before you'd finished walking through the door. A tin sign above his head read, "Harold Briggs, General Merchandise." "Help you?" he said. He did not sound like he wanted to help her. "I'm looking for a room," Clara said. "A boarding house. Somewhere I can stay for 2 or 3 nights while I wait for the next coach south." Harold Briggs looked her over slowly. His eyes moved from her bag to her coat to her face, and then back to her bag. "You come in on the afternoon stage?" "Yes, sir." "From where?" "Kansas City, Missouri." "Long way." He didn't say it like it was impressive. He said it like it was suspicious. "You got people here?" Clara thought briefly about lying. "I thought I did. It didn't work out." Briggs set down the jar he'd been holding. "You're the mail order woman. The one coming for Tom Harding." The words landed the way a slap lands. Not just painful, but humiliating. Because someone had been watching and talking, and the whole town already knew. "I was," she said carefully. "Mr. Harding's situation changed. I'm simply looking for a room while I arrange alternative travel. The widow Pearson takes in boarders." Briggs said it slowly. "But she told me this morning she's full up on account of the storm. Got 3 travelers from the blocked coach stuck there already." He paused. "And I don't reckon she'd take a stranger in over her regulars anyway." "Is there anywhere else?" "Not in Coldwater Creek." Clara held his gaze. "Then I'll sleep in the station." "Station's locked after 6, Briggs said. He said it without apology, without any visible concern for what that information meant for the woman standing in front of him. "Station master goes home to his family. Doesn't come back until morning." "I see." Clara's voice was very steady. She had learned a long time ago that showing desperation to people who already held the advantage was like handing them a weapon. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Briggs." She turned toward the door. "Miss." Briggs' voice had a new note in it. Not kindness exactly, but something adjacent to it. Discomfort, maybe. "Storm's picking up bad tonight. You shouldn't be outside." "I appreciate the concern." She put her hand on the door. "I'll manage." She walked back out into the cold. She had been standing on the covered porch of the general store for approximately 7 minutes, long enough for the feeling to leave her fingers, but not long enough to admit she had no plan, when she heard the sound of horses. Not one horse, several, moving fast despite the snow and the dark. A wagon came up the main road with 2 draft horses leaning hard into the wind, their breath coming in great white clouds. The man on the bench seat was big enough that Clara noticed it even from a distance, and he was driving like a man who knew exactly where he was going and did not intend to stop for anything. He stopped for the general store. He pulled the horses up short, set the brake, jumped down from the bench, and strode through the snow toward the porch steps without looking up. He was nearly at the door before he saw Clara standing there. He stopped. He was maybe 35, dark coat, broad shoulders, a hat with snow piled on the brim. His face was the kind that had spent years outdoors, weathered, sharp along the jaw, with eyes that were a very steady shade of gray. There was a scar running from his left temple to his cheekbone, old and faded. But it didn't make him look dangerous. It made him look like a man who had survived something and kept moving. He looked at her for 1 second. "Evening, ma'am." "Evening," Clara said. He went inside. Clara stood on the porch. 3 minutes later, he came back out carrying a large flour sack and 2 wrapped parcels, moving fast the way he'd moved going in. He got 2 steps past her and stopped again. He turned around. He stood in the snow at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her with those gray eyes. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Clara said. "You don't look fine." "I'm managing." He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved hard between them, throwing snow sideways. "Briggs tell you the station's locked?" "He mentioned it." "And the widow Pearson's full." Clara looked at him directly. "You've spoken with Mr. Briggs recently?" "Just now, through the window." The man shifted the flour sack to his other arm. He was watching you stand out here. Figured he'd been helpful in his particular way. There was something dry in his voice. Not mean, just honest. My name's Eli Calloway. I run the Calloway Ranch about 4 miles north. Clara Whitfield. He nodded once. You're waiting for the southbound coach? Whenever it runs again. 3 days, he said. Maybe 4 if this storm doesn't break. He looked up at the sky for a moment, reading something in the clouds that Clara couldn't read. Probably 4. Clara said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Eli Calloway set the flour sack down in the wagon bed and turned back to face her. He did not look like a man who was about to offer something. He looked like a man having an argument with himself. Then he took off his hat, shook the snow off it, and held it in his hands. I got 2 boys at home, he said. 6 years old, both of them. My mother's been watching them while I came into town for supplies. He paused. Their mother passed away 2 winters ago. Clara waited. I'm not... He stopped, started again. This isn't the kind of thing I'd normally say to a woman I just met on a porch in a snowstorm. He looked directly at her. But I need help at the ranch right now, more than I've needed much of anything in a long while. And you need somewhere to be for 3 or 4 days, and I figure one problem can answer another, if both people are decent about it. Clara studied his face. She had spent 3 years in Missouri learning to read men. Which ones meant what they said? Which ones meant something else entirely? Which ones didn't know the difference? Eli Calloway's face was hard to read, but not because he was hiding something. It was hard to read because he wasn't performing anything. He was just standing in the snow, holding his hat, saying a true thing. What kind of help? She asked. The cattle are struggling in this cold. I've got 3 ranch hands, and we're running short rotations keeping the herd from freezing out in the north pasture. I can't be in the barn and in the house at the same time, and my mother's 68 years old, and she's been doing the work of 2 women for the past week, trying to keep up with the boys and the cooking and the firewood. He paused. Jesse and Cole, my boys, they need someone in the house with them who's got energy to spare. My mother doesn't, much as she won't say it. You want me to watch your children? I want to offer you a warm room, 3 meals a day, and a ride back to the station the moment that coach is running again, he said. In exchange for helping around the house. Cooking, watching the boys, whatever my mother needs. No strings, no obligation past what I just said. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Calloway, she finally said, you don't know a single thing about me. I know you told Tom Harding to buy himself a conscience and walked away without begging him for anything, he said. Briggs heard the whole thing through his window. Told me right when I walked in, figuring I'd find it funny. He put his hat back on. I didn't find it funny. I found it impressive. Clara felt something move in her chest. Not warmth, not yet, but the memory of warmth. The shape of what warmth used to feel like, before the past 3 years had made her so careful. I'm a widow, she said. My husband died 18 months ago. Left debts. I've been working and saving since then, and I spent nearly everything I had getting here. She said it plainly, without apology or performance. I want you to know exactly who you're inviting onto your ranch. Eli looked at her steadily. I'm a widower, he said. My wife died in childbirth, and I couldn't save her. I've been running that ranch alone since then, and I haven't done a particularly good job of the parts that matter most. He paused. I figure we're even on hard history. The wind hit them both at the same moment, a hard gust that made the porch lantern swing and threw snow up against the store windows. Clara grabbed her bag. Eli grabbed his hat. When it passed, they looked at each other. All right, Clara said. Just until the coach runs. Just until the coach runs, he agreed.
The wagon ride took 40 minutes in the dark and the snow, and it was the most uncomfortable 40 minutes of Clara's life. Perched on the hard bench seat, with the wind driving needles of ice against any exposed skin, the horses working hard, the road barely visible ahead of the lantern's reach. Eli drove without talking much. That suited Clara fine. She wasn't in a conversational mood. Once he said, "You cold?" "I'm fine." "There's a blanket behind the seat." She found it and pulled it around her shoulders. It smelled like horses and wood smoke. It was the best thing she'd felt all day. The ranch appeared out of the dark as a cluster of yellow lights, windows glowing, a broad shape of buildings, the low sound of cattle somewhere beyond. Clara climbed down from the wagon stiffly and followed Eli toward the front door. He opened it without knocking. The kitchen hit her first. Warmth, lamplight, the smell of something cooking. A woman sat at the kitchen table with a mending basket in her lap. She was older, silver-haired, with a straight back and hands that had done decades of hard work. She looked up when the door opened, and her eyes moved immediately past Eli to Clara. Her expression did not change, but her hands went still. "Mother," Eli said, "this is Clara Whitfield. She's going to help out for a few days while the coach is blocked." Ruth Calloway set down her mending very slowly. She looked at her son. She looked at Clara. She looked at her son again. "Eli James Calloway," she said quietly, "you want to explain to me what exactly you brought home out of that storm?" "A capable woman who needed a place to be," Eli said, hanging his coat on the door hook. "And we needed the help. You know we did." "I know no such thing." "Ruth, I'm standing right here," Clara said. Both of them looked at her. Clara set her bag down near the door and looked directly at the older woman. "Mrs. Calloway, I understand why you're concerned. You don't know me. Your son brought me home from town in a snowstorm, and that sounds a great deal worse than it is." She kept her voice even. "I'm not here for anything except a warm place to sleep and honest work until the southbound coach runs again. If at any point you want me to leave, I'll leave. That's a promise, and I don't make promises I don't intend to keep." Ruth Calloway studied her for a very long, uncomfortable moment. "Can you cook?" the older woman finally said. "Yes, ma'am." "Biscuits?" "From scratch." Ruth's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but Clara caught it. "The boys haven't had proper biscuits in 2 weeks," she said. "My hands have been aching something terrible." She picked up her mending again. "You can have the room at the end of the hall. There's a hook on the back of the door for your coat." Clara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway." "Ruth," the older woman said without looking up, "we don't stand on ceremony in this house." Clara was pulling her coat off when she heard it. A small sound from the hallway, too quiet to be accidental, and too deliberate to be innocent. She turned. 2 boys stood at the edge of the kitchen doorway in their nightshirts, shoulder to shoulder, staring at her with enormous dark eyes. They were identical in the way of twins. Same dark hair, same broad forehead, same shape of their father's jaw, except that one of them was leaning slightly forward with an expression of pure, fascinated curiosity, and the other was holding onto his brother's sleeve and watching Clara with careful, measuring eyes. The curious one spoke first. "Are you the lady from town?" "I am," Clara said. "Are you supposed to be in bed?" "Probably," he said, with the complete lack of concern of a child who has decided the answer to that question is not his problem. "I'm Jesse. That's Cole." He doesn't talk much to strangers, but he will eventually." Cole said nothing. He was still watching Clara with those careful eyes. "I'm Clara," she said. Jesse took 2 steps into the kitchen. "Why'd you come here?" "Because your father offered me a room, and I needed one." "Because of the storm?" "That's right." Jesse thought about this. "Dad says the storm might last a week." "Your father told me 3 or 4 days." Jesse tilted his head. "Are you going to stay if it lasts a week?" "Jesse," Eli's voice came from across the room. Quiet, no anger in it, just direction. Jesse looked at his father. "I was just asking." "You were interrogating," Eli said. "There's a difference. Take your brother back to bed." Jesse turned back to Clara with the efficiency of a child making the most of his remaining seconds. "Do you know how to make cornbread?" "I do." His face lit up. "Cole likes cornbread. He won't tell you that, but he does." He grabbed his brother's arm. "Come on." Cole let himself be pulled, but at the doorway he stopped and looked back at Clara one more time. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her with those serious, searching eyes. The eyes of a child who had learned early that the world was not always trustworthy and had decided to verify everything himself. Then he turned and followed his brother down the dark hallway. Clara stood very still in the kitchen for a moment. Ruth was mending. Eli was checking the fire. The wind beat against the windows. She thought about the door closing in Thomas Harding's face. She thought about Harold Briggs watching her through his window. She thought about the $3 on the frozen ground. She thought about Cole Calloway's eyes. She picked up her bag and walked to the room at the end of the hall. The room was small. A bed, a washstand, a single window thick with frost. A hook on the back of the door for her coat. Clara sat on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the frost on the window for a long time. She was not safe. She understood that clearly. She was in a stranger's house in the middle of Wyoming, with a blizzard outside, and no money and no plan beyond wait for the coach. She did not know Eli Calloway. She did not know Ruth Calloway. She did not know if the hard thing in Ruth's eyes was honest caution or something less forgiving. But Jesse had asked if she could make cornbread, and Cole had looked back at her in the doorway. And Eli Calloway had stood in the snow, holding his hat, and said, "I figure we're even on hard history," with the voice of a man who actually meant it. Clara unfolded her hands, reached into her bag, and pulled out the Missouri Dispatch advertisement, the one she'd clipped and folded and carried across half the country. She looked at it for a moment. Thomas Harding's name in small print. Serious inquiries only. She folded it in half, then in half again. Then she crossed the room, lifted the lid on the small iron stove, and pushed the paper inside. The flame caught it immediately. She watched it burn. Then she went to the washstand, cleaned her hands and face, and went back to the kitchen to find out if there was flour enough for biscuits in the morning. Clara was up before the sun. She didn't sleep well in strange beds, hadn't since her husband died and left her alone in the house they'd shared in Kansas City, listening to the sounds of a building that no longer felt like hers. She lay in the dark for an hour, with the wind pressing against the frosted window, and the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. And then she got up, got dressed, and went to find the kitchen. Ruth was already there. The older woman was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and the particular stillness of someone who had been awake for a while and wasn't surprised to have company. She looked at Clara when she came in, but didn't say anything, just watched. Clara found the flour without asking, found the lard, the salt, the baking powder. She moved quietly around the kitchen, learning where things were by opening cabinets and looking. And Ruth watched all of it without offering help or direction. After about 5 minutes, Ruth said, You hold the bowl different than most women." Clara looked down at her hands. "My mother was left-handed. She taught me." Ruth was quiet again. Then, "My husband was left-handed. Drove me half to madness for 20 years. She said it without any softness, but there was something underneath it. "He's been gone 11 years. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "Don't be. He had a good life, and he knew it." Ruth wrapped both hands around her coffee cup.
"Are you going to ask me about Eli's wife?" Clara kept working the dough. "No." Most women would. "I'm not here about Eli," Clara said plainly. "I'm here about the biscuits." Something shifted in Ruth's face. Not a smile, not exactly, but the suggestion of one. She stood up slowly, with the careful movement of a woman whose joints had strong opinions about cold mornings, and poured a second cup of coffee. She set it on the counter near Clara's elbow without being asked. Clara didn't say thank you. She just picked it up and kept working. Ruth understood that kind of acknowledgement. She sat back down, and they were quiet together for a while, which was its own kind of conversation. The biscuits were in the oven when the boys came downstairs. Jessie came first, as Clara was already learning to expect. Loud in the stairwell, sock feet on the wood floor, arriving in the kitchen like a question that hadn't decided what it was asking yet. Cole came behind him, quieter, watching. Jessie stopped when he smelled the oven. "You actually made biscuits," he said, with the tone of a child who had been promised things before and had developed a policy of verification. "I said I could," Clara said. Jessie looked at his grandmother. Ruth gave a slight nod, the adult equivalent of, "Yes, this is confirmed." Jessie pulled out a chair and sat down with the satisfied air of someone whose morning had already exceeded expectations. Cole sat beside his brother. He was looking at Clara again with those measuring eyes, and Clara looked back at him without making a performance of it. Just a steady, honest look that said, "I see you looking, and I don't mind." Cole dropped his gaze to the table, but he didn't move his chair away. Eli came in from outside 20 minutes later, with snow on his boots and the cold still coming off his coat. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and took in the scene. His mother at the table with her coffee, his sons eating biscuits, Clara standing at the stove turning bacon, and his face did something complicated that he put away quickly. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's hot," Ruth told him. He poured a cup and stood near the door, still in his coat. "Storm didn't break overnight," he said to the room generally. "North fence is holding, but I lost 2 cattle to the cold in the far pasture. We're going to need to move the rest of the herd closer to the barn today." Jessie looked up. "Can I help?" "No," Eli and Ruth said at the same time. Jessie accepted this with the resignation of someone accustomed to the answer. Eli looked at Clara. "My ranch hands are Tom Greer and the Aldridge brothers, Walt and Pete. They'll be at the bunkhouse. If you need anything while I'm out and can't get to me, Tom's the one to ask. He's been with us 8 years. "All right," Clara said. "The boys are—" He stopped, started differently. "Jessie will talk your ear off if you let him. Cole doesn't say much, but he listens to everything, so be careful what you say around him, because he remembers it word for word, and he'll repeat it at the worst possible moment." He said this last part looking at Cole, who was very deliberately studying his biscuit. "I'll remember that," Clara said. Eli finished his coffee, pulled his hat off the hook, and looked at his mother. Something passed between them, the quick, compressed language of people who had been talking to each other for decades. Ruth gave him a look that meant something Clara couldn't translate yet. Eli put his hat on and went back outside. The door closed, and the kitchen felt different. Not emptier exactly, but adjusted. Jessie said to Clara, "Dad doesn't talk a lot either. Cole got it from him." "Jessie," Ruth said. "I'm just explaining," Jessie said. Clara turned back to the stove. She was beginning to understand the rhythm of this family. The way Ruth held the household together with the sheer force of her consistency. The way Jesse narrated everything as if he was afraid the world would forget to notice itself. The way Cole absorbed it all and gave nothing back until he decided you'd earned it. She had been in this house less than 12 hours, and she could already see how tired Ruth was. Not the tired of one bad night, but the accumulated tired of a woman who had been doing too much for too long, and had stopped mentioning it because mentioning it didn't change anything. After breakfast, when the boys went to get dressed, Clara started washing the dishes without being asked. Ruth stood up to help, and Clara said, "Sit, your hands are hurting." Ruth stopped. "I didn't say anything about my hands." "You held the coffee cup in both hands this morning. You sat down carefully. And you didn't knead the bread last night. There's a half-finished loaf on the counter that stopped where the kneading should start." Clara kept washing. "I'm not trying to overstep. I'm just saying, sit down. I can do the dishes." Ruth sat down. She didn't say thank you either, but she sat. The morning passed in work. Clara learned the house the way she'd always learned places, by moving through them, paying attention, filing away where things were and how things worked. The pantry was well stocked, but not organized, so she organized it while the bread was rising. The firewood inside was running low, so she found the woodpile outside and brought in enough to last the day. Jesse followed her on the second trip and carried a small armful with tremendous seriousness of purpose. "I do this job usually," he told her. "Then you can have it back tomorrow," she said. He seemed to find this acceptable. Cole watched from the porch. He had put on his coat and boots to stand outside in the cold and watch Clara carry wood, which struck her as a significant investment of effort for a child who ostensibly didn't care about her. On her third trip past the porch, she said, without stopping, "You can help if you want." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he got down from the porch and picked up 2 pieces of wood. He didn't say anything, but he carried the wood inside, and on Clara's 4th trip, he was already back on the porch, waiting with 2 more pieces. And that was that. Ruth, watching from the kitchen window, said nothing, but she watched. Eli came in for the midday meal with Tom Greer and Walt Aldridge. They were trail-worn and cold and said little at the table, eating with the focused efficiency of men who had a great deal more work waiting for them outside. Tom Greer was somewhere in his 40s, lean and sun-browned, with a straightforward manner and no visible opinion about Clara one way or another. Walt Aldridge was younger, maybe 25, and he looked at Clara with the open curiosity of someone who had heard the story from Harold Briggs' side of things and was still forming his own opinion. Clara served the meal and sat at the far end of the table and said nothing that wasn't asked of her. After the men went back out, Jesse leaned toward Cole and said in a stage whisper that was easily audible to everyone in the room, "I think Walt likes her." "Jesse," Eli said from the doorway. "I'm just saying what I see," Jesse said. Eli looked at Clara very briefly. Not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement. And then he was gone. The afternoon brought the real trouble. It started with Cole. Clara was in the kitchen with Ruth, working through a pile of mending that Ruth's hands couldn't manage, when she heard a sound from upstairs. Not a crash, not a cry, but a particular quality of silence that followed some small accident and preceded either tears or an attempt to hide the evidence. She went to the stairs. Cole was sitting on the top step holding his left hand in his right. There was blood on his palm. Not a lot, but enough. He looked at her without saying anything, with the expression of a child deciding whether to admit what had happened. "Let me see," Clara said. He held out his hand. A small cut, maybe an inch across, on the heel of his palm.
She sat down beside him on the step and looked at it carefully. "What were you doing?" Silence. "Cole?" "Trying to fix my knife," he said, very quietly. The blade came loose from the handle.
"Do you have the knife?" He produced it from his pocket with the caution of someone surrendering something they expect to lose permanently. Clara looked at it. A small folding knife, old, the kind a man gives a boy when he decides the boy is old enough. The blade had worked loose from the wooden handle, which was why it had slipped. "Whose knife?" she said. Cole's jaw tightened. "My mom's dad gave it to my dad. My dad gave it to me." Clara held the knife carefully in both hands. "It can be fixed," she said. "The pin that holds the blade just needs to be reset. Do you have a small hammer and a finishing nail?" Cole stared at her. "You know how to fix a knife?" "My husband had a shop. I watched him work a lot." She stood up. "Let's clean your hand first. Then we'll fix the knife." She took him to the washstand in the kitchen and cleaned the cut efficiently, not making a fuss over it, not pretending it didn't hurt, just dealing with it the way you dealt with small injuries, which was directly and without drama. Cole sat very still and let her work. When she wrapped his hand in the strip of clean cloth, he said, "It doesn't need bandaging. It'll bleed on everything if we don't." He looked at the bandage. "Okay." Ruth was watching from her chair by the window. Clara caught her eye, and Ruth looked away quickly, which meant, Clara was beginning to understand, that Ruth had been watching closely enough that she didn't want to get caught at it. She found a hammer and a finishing nail in the tool drawer near the back door. She and Cole sat across from each other at the kitchen table, and she showed him how to reset the pin carefully, how to hold the blade in alignment, where to tap and how hard, when to stop. Cole watched every step with his full attention. He asked 2 questions, both of them precise. When the blade was fixed and seated properly, Clara folded it closed and set it on the table between them. Cole picked it up, opened it, closed it. The blade moved smoothly now, locked correctly in place. He looked at her. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time he'd said her name, or anything unprompted, to her directly. His voice was so serious and so young at the same time that Clara had to look down at the table for a moment. "You're welcome," she said. "Keep it in your pocket, not your hand. And if the pin ever works loose again, you come find me." Cole nodded. He put the knife in his pocket. He got up from the table and went to find his brother, and Clara sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen, with the afternoon light going gray in the windows, and the wind pushing hard at the walls of the house. Ruth said from her chair, "His mother gave that knife to Eli on their wedding day. It had been her father's." Clara looked up. "He's never let anyone else touch it," Ruth said. She had her mending in her lap, but she wasn't working on it. "Not Eli, not Jesse, nobody." She paused. "He let you touch it." Clara didn't say anything. "I'm not saying what it means," Ruth said carefully. "I'm just saying what happened." She picked up her needle. "Supper will want starting in about an hour. There's a venison roast in the cold pantry." Clara stood up. "I'll find it." She was halfway to the pantry when Ruth spoke again, not looking up from her mending. "You were right about my hands," she said. "They've been bad since October." A pause. "I don't like admitting that." "I know," Clara said. "I wouldn't either." Ruth gave a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite dismissal. Clara went to find the roast. Eli came in at sundown with mud on his boots and something tired in his eyes that was deeper than physical tired. He washed up at the back door and came into the kitchen and stood for a moment, just taking in the smell of something cooking and the sound of his sons arguing happily in the next room, and the sight of Clara at the stove. He sat down at the table. Clara poured coffee without being asked and set it in front of him. Lose any more cattle? Ruth asked. Not today. We got the herd moved. He wrapped his hands around the cup. Ground's freezing harder than I expected. If this keeps up another week, we're going to have trouble with the water supply to the barn. Tom know what to do about that? Tom's got ideas. I've got different ideas. He drank the coffee. We'll figure it out. Jesse came running in from the other room, with Cole behind him. Dad, Clara fixed Cole's knife. Eli went still. He looked at Clara's back, then at Cole, who was standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. That right? Cole nodded. The pin had worked loose, Clara said without turning around. It was a straightforward fix. Eli was quiet for a moment. Cole, he said. Cole looked at his father. You take care of that knife. I know, Dad. All right. Eli drank his coffee. Jesse launched into a full account of Clara's technique with the hammer and finishing nail, which was detailed and largely accurate, and lasted until supper was on the table. That night, after the boys were in bed and Ruth had gone to her room and the house had gone quiet, Clara stood at the kitchen window with a cup of tea and looked out at the dark. The snow was still falling. The bunkhouse light was on across the yard. Somewhere, out in the darkness, the cattle were moving. She heard Eli come in from checking the barn, heard him stop in the kitchen doorway behind her. Lamp still on, he said. Thought you'd be asleep. Couldn't. He crossed to the stove and poured himself the last of the coffee. He stood on the other side of the kitchen, not close, not intrusive, just present, in the way of a man who understood that company and conversation were two different things. After a while, he said, Cole talked to you today. A little. He hasn't talked to a woman he didn't already know since his mother died. He said it plainly, without any particular weight on it, just as a fact being delivered. I thought you should know that. Clara kept looking at the window. Outside, the snow came down steady and patient and indifferent to everything beneath it. He's a good kid, she said. Yeah, Eli said. He is. The fire settled in the stove. The wind moved against the house. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen, in the comfortable quiet of two people who had both learned, at some cost, that silence was not the same as emptiness. Clara finished her tea. Good night, Mr. Calloway. Eli, he said. We don't stand on ceremony here. My mother said so. Clara set her cup in the wash basin. She almost smiled. Good night, Eli. She walked down the hall to the room at the end, the one with the frost on the window and the hook on the back of the door. She hung up her coat. She sat on the edge of the bed. She was not safe. She still understood that clearly. The coach was still 3 days away, maybe 4, maybe more. The town still had Harold Briggs and his window and his opinions. She still had no money and no clear plan. But Cole Calloway had said thank you and meant it with his whole self. And Ruth had told her about the knife. And somewhere in the house, 2 6-year-old boys were asleep without knowing that the woman down the hall had come here by mistake and was leaving as soon as the road was clear. Clara lay down in the dark and listened to the wind. She did not sleep for a long time. But when she finally did, she did not dream about Thomas Harding's door closing, or Harold Briggs' window, or the $3 on the frozen ground. She dreamed about nothing at all, which was, she thought, the closest thing to peace she'd had in a very long time. The third day brought Harold Briggs. Clara was in the yard with Jesse and Cole, showing them how to check the water trough near the smaller barn to make sure it hadn't frozen solid overnight, when she heard the wagon coming up the road. Jesse heard it too, and turned immediately with the instinctive excitement of a child for whom any arrival was an event. Cole looked up more slowly, more carefully, the way he looked at everything. The wagon stopped at the gate.
Harold Briggs climbed down with the deliberate movements of a man who had rehearsed his reason for being somewhere. He was wearing his good coat. That told Clara something. "Mr. Calloway around?" he called toward the house. Ruth appeared in the doorway before Clara could answer. "He's in the north pasture, Harold. What do you need?" Briggs walked through the gate. His eyes moved to Clara with the particular quality of a man who had come specifically to see her and was pretending he hadn't. "Mornin', Ruth. Just came to check on things. Storm's been hard on everyone." "We're managing fine," Ruth said. "I can see that." He stopped a few feet from Clara. "Miss Whitfield, you're still here." "The coach isn't running yet," Clara said. "No, it isn't." He put his hands in his coat pockets. "Spoke to the station master this morning. Says it might be another 5 days, maybe 6. Clara kept her expression even. "I appreciate you letting me know." "Tom Harding feels terrible about the situation," Briggs said. "His wife, the new one, she feels bad too. They wanted me to tell you that." "That's kind of them."
They were wondering, Briggs continued, with the careful tone of a man delivering a message he'd been given specific words for, whether you might be more comfortable staying at the widow Pearson's place. One of her travelers left yesterday, so there's a room open now. Tom said he'd cover the cost, given the circumstances. Jessie was watching the conversation with open fascination. Cole had moved, without any apparent decision, to stand slightly closer to Clara. Clara looked at Harold Briggs for a long moment. She understood exactly what was happening. Tom Harding's conscience wasn't the reason for this visit. The town was talking, and Harold Briggs was the town's instrument for managing things it found untidy. "Tell Mr. Harding I appreciate the offer," she said. "But I've made an arrangement with the Calloways, and I intend to honor it." "It's just that people are talking, Miss Whitfield," Briggs said, dropping the pretense of the message now and going straight to the real thing. "A woman alone in a widower's house. It doesn't look right. I'm sure you understand." "I understand perfectly," Clara said. "I'm helping Mrs. Ruth Calloway with the household, while her son manages a difficult situation with his cattle in the worst storm of the decade. There are 2 children here who need consistent care, and Mrs. Calloway's hands have been troubling her." She paused. "Is there something about that arrangement that requires correction?" Briggs's jaw moved. "I'm just saying how it looks." "You're saying how it looks to people who aren't here," Clara said. "I'm telling you how it is." Cole's hand, very small and very deliberate, closed around 2 fingers of Clara's left hand. She didn't look down. She didn't move. She just kept her eyes on Harold Briggs and let the child hold on to her. Briggs looked at Cole, then at Clara. Then he cleared his throat. "Well, I'll pass along your answer to Tom." "You do that," Ruth said from the doorway. Her voice was pleasant, in the way a closed door is pleasant. There and not moving. Briggs climbed back into his wagon with slightly less dignity than he'd arrived with. Clara watched the wagon until it turned back onto the main road, and then she looked down at Cole. Cole released her fingers. He looked up at her with his father's steady gray eyes. "He was trying to make you leave," he said. "Yes." "Are you going to leave?" "Not because of him," Clara said. Cole absorbed this. Jessie, who had been practically vibrating beside them, said, "Grandma looked like she was going to throw something at him." "Jessie," Ruth called from the doorway. "I'm just saying what I saw," Jessie said. Clara almost laughed. She caught it and turned it into a breath instead, but Cole saw it. She could tell by the way his eyes changed, just slightly, going from serious to something that was thinking about becoming a smile. They went back to checking the water trough. Eli came in at midday, and Clara told him about Briggs' visit plainly and without editorializing. She told him what Briggs said, what she said, and what the visit was actually about. And she watched Eli's face while she talked.
His expression didn't change much, but something in his jaw tightened on the part about how it looks. When she finished, he said, "You should have called me. You were in the north pasture. The cattle needed you more than I needed rescuing from Harold Briggs." Eli looked at her steadily. "You're on my property. What happens here is my responsibility." "What happens to me is my responsibility," Clara said. "I handled it." They looked at each other across the kitchen table with the particular tension of two people who had the same argument from opposite sides of the same principle. Ruth put a bowl of soup in front of Eli. "She handled it better than you would have," Ruth said. "You would have told Harold to mind his own business, in a way that would have given him two more things to talk about. She told him the same thing, with less ammunition." She sat down. "Eat your soup." Eli ate his soup. After a moment, he said, without looking up, "Did Cole go outside this morning?" "He helped with the water trough," Clara said. Eli was quiet. Cole had not voluntarily gone outside since November. Clara didn't know that yet, but Ruth did. And Ruth looked at her son with the expression of a woman filing information away. The soup was almost finished when the real crisis of the day arrived. And it arrived not from outside, but from inside the house. From the back bedroom, where Eli had been sleeping alone for 2 years, in the form of a sound that Clara recognized immediately. A child coughing. Not Jesse's bright performative cough that he occasionally deployed for attention. Something different. The wet, labored cough that starts in the chest and doesn't stop. Eli was up before the sound finished. Clara was right behind him. Cole was in his bed, which was unusual because Cole had been up and dressed 2 hours ago. He was lying on his side under both blankets, with his eyes half open and his face carrying that particular color that children get when something has been wrong for a while and they haven't told anyone. "Hey!" Eli sat on the edge of the bed and put his hand on Cole's forehead. His expression went tight. "How long have you been feeling bad?" Cole's voice came out smaller than usual. "Since this morning." "Why didn't you say something?" Cole didn't answer. Clara stepped closer, and Eli looked at her. Not asking for help exactly, but not asking either. She leaned in and looked at Cole carefully. His breathing was working harder than it should. When she put her hand alongside Eli's on the boy's forehead, the fever was real and rising. "Does your chest hurt?" she asked Cole. Cole nodded. "When you breathe deep?" Another nod. Eli stood up. "I need to get Doc Marsh from town." "The road's drifted bad on the north end," Clara said. "You just came through it." "I know the road. It'll take you 2 hours round trip in this weather. Minimum." She kept her voice level. "Does anyone here know how to make a mustard plaster?" Ruth appeared in the doorway. She had heard. Her eyes went to Cole and then to Clara. "I know how," Ruth said. "Then tell me what you need and I'll get it." "Cabinet beside the pantry," Ruth said. "Dry mustard, flour, the lard tin, and the soft cloth on the second shelf." Clara went. She moved fast, but not frantically. The kind of efficient speed that comes from keeping a steady head, which she had learned not in any schoolroom, but in the long Missouri winter, when her husband's lungs had gone bad, and the doctor was a day's ride away, and she had been the only one there. She was back in 2 minutes with everything Ruth needed. Eli watched from the doorway, with his hands at his sides, and the particular helplessness of a man who is very capable in all the wrong directions for the current emergency. Jesse stood beside him, pressed against his father's arm, for once completely quiet. Ruth and Clara worked together at Cole's bedside, with the smooth efficiency of women who had both done difficult things with their hands and knew how to follow each other's rhythm without discussion. Ruth made the plaster. Clara prepared the cloth. When it was ready, Clara spoke quietly to Cole while Ruth applied it, not distracting him with chatter, just talking in a low, steady voice about nothing in particular, keeping his attention on her face instead of the discomfort.
Cole kept his eyes on her the entire time. He did not cry. He was his father's son. When it was done, Ruth said to Eli, "His fever's high, but it's not dangerous yet. Keep him warm and still. If it goes higher tonight, we'll need the doctor." She looked at Clara. "You've done this before." "Yes," Clara said. "Your husband? And before that, my younger brother." She straightened up. "I can sit with him tonight if you need me to." Eli was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not gratitude exactly, which she didn't want anyway, but something more complicated. The look of a man recalibrating something. "I'll sit with him," Eli said. "He's my boy." "I know that," Clara said evenly. "I'm not trying to take your place. I'm offering to spell you so you can sleep a few hours, because you've been running on nothing for 3 days. And if you get sick too, this whole ranch is in trouble." Eli looked at her. The logic was unarguable, and they both knew it. "A few hours," he said finally. "A few hours," she agreed. Jesse tugged his father's sleeve. "Is Cole going to be okay?" Eli put his hand on Jesse's head. "Yeah, buddy. He's going to be okay." Jesse looked past his father at Clara. She gave him a small, honest nod. Not the exaggerated reassurance adults sometimes gave children to make themselves feel better, but a real answer from one person to another. Jesse's shoulders dropped about an inch. "Okay," he said. He went back to his room without being told. Eli stayed with Cole through the afternoon and into the early evening. Clara managed the house, kept Jesse occupied, kept the fire up, kept food ready for when people needed it. Around 7 in the evening, she brought a plate to Eli in Cole's room and left it without making him talk to her, because she could see that he was in the particular, exhausted silence of a parent sitting with a sick child and counting every degree of fever. At 10 o'clock, she knocked on the door. "Go sleep. I've got him." Eli looked at Cole, who was sleeping now, breathing better than he had that afternoon. He looked at Clara. "You know what to watch for?" he said. "Breathing gets worse, fever spikes, he wakes up confused. I'll come get you immediately. I won't wait, and I won't try to handle it alone." She met his eyes directly. "I understand the difference between what I can manage and what I can't." Eli stood up. He looked at his son for a long moment, with the expression of a man doing something that cost him something. Stepping back, trusting someone else with the most important thing he had. 2 hours, he said. 2 hours, she said. Go. He went. Clara settled into the chair beside Cole's bed. The lamp was turned low. The house was quiet around her, the storm still working at the walls, the fire in the small bedroom stove doing its job. Cole's breathing was easier now, the plaster doing what it was supposed to do. After about 20 minutes, Cole's eyes opened. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then turned his head and found her in the chair. "You stayed," he said. His voice was rough from the cough, but steady. "I said I would." He looked at the ceiling again. Clara waited. "My mom used to sit there," he said, "when me and Jesse got sick. She'd sit in that chair all night and not leave." Clara was very still. "Jesse doesn't remember that," Cole said. "He was too little. But I remember." His voice was entirely matter-of-fact, the way children sometimes talked about devastating things because they hadn't yet learned that devastating things were supposed to be performed with more weight. "I remember everything about her." "That's a gift," Clara said quietly. Cole thought about that. "Dad says so too." A pause. "He doesn't talk about her much, though. I think it hurts him." "It probably does," Clara said. "That doesn't mean he doesn't think about her." "I know."
Cole's eyes were getting heavy again, the fever pulling him back toward sleep.
Clara? Yeah? I'm glad you didn't go to Mrs. Pearson's.
Clara pressed her hands together in her lap.
Me too, she said.
Cole slept. Clara sat in the chair that his mother had used and kept watch over him in the lamplight, and did not let herself think too far ahead, because thinking too far ahead had a way of making the present moment feel like something that didn't belong to her. She belonged here, right now. That was enough. That was what she had. Around midnight, Eli appeared in the doorway. He'd slept, she could tell. Some of the worst of the exhaustion had smoothed out of his face. He looked at Cole, then at Clara.
How is he? Fever's down a little. Breathing's been steady. He woke up once around 11 and talked for a minute and went back to sleep. Eli came into the room and crouched beside the bed, checking Cole's temperature with the back of his hand, the way parents did. The quick, certain movement of someone who knew the baseline by instinct. He exhaled. Better, he said. Yes. He straightened up and looked at Clara in the chair. She was tired. He could see that clearly. She'd been up since before dawn, doing the work of 2 people, and she'd sat with his sick child for 2 hours at midnight, without complaint or expectation. Go to bed, he said. I'm fine. Clara. He said her name the way Ruth said things, plainly, without a question in it. Go to bed. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood up, set the lamp at the right angle so he could see Cole clearly from the chair, and walked to the door. She stopped there. Eli, she said. He looked at her. She didn't have the words for what she meant to say, and she understood that about herself in time to not embarrass them both by trying. So she just said, He's a remarkable kid. Eli's face did the complicated thing again, the thing he put away quickly. Yeah, he said. He is. Clara walked down the hall to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. Through the wall, she could hear, faintly, Eli's voice. Low, quiet, speaking to his sleeping son in the particular soft tone that strong men reserve for moments when no one was supposed to hear them being tender. She could not make out the words. She didn't try to. She lay down in the dark, and the storm pressed against the house, and the ranch held together around them all, and somewhere down the hall, a father sat with his child, and the chair was no longer empty, and Clara Whitfield, who had come to Wyoming by mistake and stayed by circumstance, lay in the small room at the end of the hall and felt, for the first time and longer than she could name, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She did not let herself trust that feeling, but she felt it anyway. Cole was better by morning. Not fully better. He was still pale, and his voice still carried the rough edge of someone whose chest had been working too hard. But his eyes were clear, and he sat up in bed and asked for cornbread, which Ruth said was the best possible sign, because the boy only ever asked for food when he'd already decided he was going to be all right. Clara made the cornbread. She also made coffee and eggs and kept the fire high and did not mention the night before to anyone, because the night before felt like something private that belonged to this family, and she had only been a temporary participant in it. Eli came in from the early morning barn check and looked at Cole at the kitchen table, and something in his shoulders released that had been held tight for nearly 24 hours. He put his hand briefly on top of Cole's head, the gesture of a man who could not always say the thing, but could do it. And Cole leaned into it for a second, the way children did when they were still young enough to not be self-conscious about needing their father. Jesse sat across from his brother and ate his cornbread with the satisfied energy of someone whose world had been briefly wrong and was now correct again. He had not asked Clara about the previous night. He had looked at her this morning when she came into the kitchen and given her a nod of genuine, 6-year-old seriousness that she found more moving than she expected.
The day moved forward the way days did on a working ranch, regardless of what had happened the night before, with the relentless requirements of animals and weather, and the 100 small tasks that kept the whole enterprise from coming apart. Eli went back outside. Tom Greer and Walt Aldridge worked the barn. Ruth moved more slowly than usual, and Clara watched her without making it obvious, and twice moved things to where Ruth needed them before Ruth had to ask. Around mid-morning, while Cole rested in the main room and Jessie read to him from a battered almanac they'd found on the shelf, Jessie reading the agricultural reports in a grave, important voice, and Cole occasionally correcting his pronunciation, Ruth came to stand beside Clara at the kitchen counter. "You knew what you were doing last night," Ruth said.
It wasn't the question. "I've had practice," Clara said. "With your brother, you said." "And my husband, before he died." She kept her hands moving on the bread she was shaping. "His lungs went bad in the winter of '81. I had him for another 4 months after that." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "That's a hard 4 months." "It was, but I had them." Clara paused. "That matters more now than the hard part." Ruth set her coffee cup down on the counter. She did it the way she did everything, with precision, no wasted motion. "I've been watching you," she said. "I know. I'm not apologizing for it." "I'm not asking you to," Clara said. "If my son had brought a stranger home in a snowstorm, I'd have watched her too. I'd have watched her like a hawk." Ruth made the sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You would have, wouldn't you?" "Absolutely," Clara said. Ruth leaned against the counter and looked toward the main room where her grandson's voices drifted through the doorway. Jessie was reading about soil temperatures for winter wheat, and Cole was telling him he was saying germination wrong. Ruth's face, watching them, was the face she reserved for moments she thought no one was looking. Soft in a way her public face never was. "Cole hasn't been outside by himself since November," Ruth said. "Did you know that?" "No." "After his mother died, he stopped going far from the house. Eli doesn't push him. I don't push him." Ruth picked up her coffee again. "Yesterday morning he went out to the yard with you, without being asked." Clara kept shaping the bread and didn't respond, because she understood that Ruth wasn't looking for a response. She was telling Clara something and trusting her to receive it correctly. "I'm not saying what it means," Ruth said, the same words she'd used about the knife. "I'm just saying what happened." "I understand," Clara said. Ruth went back to her chair. Clara put the bread in the oven. Outside, the wind was quieter than it had been in days, still cold, still present, but the frantic quality of the blizzard had softened into something more like ordinary winter, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the sky had patches of pale blue visible through the frost on the kitchen window. The storm was breaking. Clara stood at the window for a moment and looked at that thin blue sky and felt two things at exactly the same time, with equal force, pulling in exactly opposite directions. She did not let herself stand there long. The crisis with Harold Briggs came back in the afternoon, and this time he did not come alone. Clara was in the yard with Jessie. Cole was still inside resting, under orders from his grandmother, when the wagon came up the road. 2 men this time, Briggs and, Clara recognized after a moment, Thomas Harding himself. She stood in the yard and watched them come through the gate, and did not move toward them or away from them. Jessie stopped beside her. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder. "Go inside," she said. "Find your grandmother." Jessie looked at the wagon, then at her. He went. Briggs climbed down. Harding climbed down. Harding looked exactly like a man who had been told he needed to do something and had dressed carefully for it. Good coat, clean boots,
his hat in his hands before he'd even walked 10 feet. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I owe you an apology." "You do," Clara agreed. He blinked slightly. He'd expected something different from her. She could see that. Probably he had expected either anger or graciousness, and was not sure how to process simple agreement. "I handled the situation badly," he said. "I should have written earlier. I should have been more careful." "You should have," she said. "But you didn't, and here we are." She kept her voice even. "Is the apology the purpose of this visit, Mr. Harding? Or is there something else?" Harding glanced at Briggs.
Briggs stepped forward slightly, with the manner of a man who had been waiting for his cue. "There's some concern in town, Miss Whitfield, about the arrangement here. I don't want to be indelicate." "Then don't be," Clara said. Briggs stopped. "I've had this conversation with you already," Clara said. "My answer hasn't changed. Mrs. Ruth Calloway is inside this house. 2 children are inside this house. Mr. Calloway's ranch hands have been visible in the yard every day. There is nothing happening here that requires the town's management." She looked at Harding directly. "If your conscience is bothering you about the situation that caused me to need this arrangement in the first place, that's between you and your conscience. I'm not interested in making you feel better about it." Harding's ears went red. "Now, miss, I'm not finished," she said, and something in her voice made him stop. "You brought me here from Missouri on a written promise. You made that promise in good faith, and then you broke it without adequate notice, and left me stranded in the worst storm this territory has seen in a decade. I handled that situation myself. I found work and shelter through my own effort, and I intend to honor that arrangement until the coach runs." She paused. "So yes, Mr. Harding, I accept your apology, and I'd like you both to leave my employer's property now." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Briggs opened his mouth. The sound of the front door opening closed it again. Eli came out onto the porch. He had clearly been inside long enough to have heard most of what had just happened. His coat was off, and his expression had the quality of a man who had been listening and had decided to wait and see if he was needed. He looked at Harding. He looked at Briggs. He looked at Clara. "Everything all right?" he said. "Mr. Harding and Mr. Briggs were just leaving," Clara said. Eli came down the porch steps slowly and stood beside Clara. Not in front of her, not between her and the 2 men. Beside her. The distinction was not small. Harding looked at Eli. Whatever he was reading in Eli's face made him put his hat back on. "We'll be going," he said. "Eli, no hard feelings, I hope." "I don't have feelings about this particular situation, Tom," Eli said. "Miss Whitfield handled it." Harding nodded tightly. Briggs had nothing left to say. They got back in the wagon. Clara and Eli watched it go down the road and through the gate without either of them speaking. When the wagon was out of sight, Eli said, "You didn't need me." "No," she said, "but I was glad you were there." He looked at her. She looked at the road. After a moment, they went back inside. Ruth was standing in the kitchen doorway. Jesse was behind her, and behind Jesse was Cole, who had gotten up from his rest and was watching with sharp, assessing eyes. "Well," Ruth said. "It's handled," Clara said. "I heard." Ruth stepped back into the kitchen. "Sit down, both of you. I'll make coffee." It was the first time Ruth had made coffee for Clara, and Clara understood what it meant. Not a grand gesture, just a small domestic one, the kind that marked a shift from one arrangement to another. She sat down at the kitchen table. Jesse sat down immediately beside her. Cole sat across the table, with his convalescent blanket still around his shoulders, and said, "Did you make them leave?" "We made them leave," Clara said. Cole looked at his father. "Both of you?"
Miss Whitfield, mainly, Eli said. Cole's expression was the closest thing to satisfaction she'd seen on his face. He pulled his blanket tighter and said nothing more, which from Cole was essentially a standing ovation. The afternoon went quietly after that, the kind of quiet that settled over a house after a storm. Not just the weather, but the human kind. The tension that had been building since Briggs' first visit finally discharged and gone. Eli worked at the kitchen table on the ranch accounts. Ruth mended. The boys played a slow, low-energy card game on the floor near the stove. Clara worked through the pile of household tasks that had accumulated and found herself moving through the house with the ease of someone who knew where everything was. She caught herself doing it, moving through someone else's home with the confidence of belonging, and stopped in the middle of the hallway with a basket of folded laundry and made herself be honest. This was not her home. The coach was coming in 2 days, possibly 1 if the sky continued to clear. She had made an arrangement, and she would honor it, and she would leave. That had been the agreement from the first night, just until the coach runs. She had learned not to build on borrowed ground. She put the laundry away and went back to the kitchen. What she did not expect was the conversation with Eli that happened after supper, when the boys were in bed and Ruth had gone to her room early, her hands worse from the cold despite the better weather, and the house was quiet in the particular way it got after 9 o'clock. Eli was still at the table with the account books. Clara was washing the last of the supper dishes. She thought he might go to bed without saying anything, which would have been fine. She was used to the silence. Instead, he said, "Where were you planning to go?" She kept washing. "South. Somewhere warmer. I had a few letters of inquiry out to families in Colorado and New Mexico. Housekeeping mainly." "Before you answered Harding's advertisement?" "Yes." "So you had options," he said. Not a challenge, just trying to understand the sequence. "I thought Harding's offer was a better one," she said. "A more settled situation." She set a bowl on the drying rack. "I was wrong about that." "You weren't wrong about what you wanted," Eli said. "Just the specific place." Clara turned to look at him. He was looking at the account books, but not at them. His eyes were on the page, but his attention was here in the room. She'd noticed he did that when he was thinking about something he hadn't decided how to say yet. She waited. "This ranch is short," he said finally. "Not ruined, not even close. But the past 2 winters have been hard, and I've been spending too much on hired help because I've been trying to do with 4 men what a properly run operation needs 6 for." He turned a page without reading it. "If I had a full household, someone managing the inside of this place properly, so my mother wasn't running herself to the ground, someone reliable with the boys, I could put 2 more men on the land work, and we'd turn the corner by spring." Clara was very still. "I'm not saying this right," Eli said. "You're saying it plainly enough," Clara said. "I'm following you." He looked at her now. "I'm not Tom Harding. I'm not going to put an advertisement in a newspaper and ask a woman to cross the country on a promise I can't keep." He paused. "But you're already here, and we already know." He stopped and started again. "The boys already trust you. My mother trusts you, and she doesn't trust people quickly. And you—" Another pause. "You handled yourself today in a way that made me think you could handle anything this place put in front of you." "Eli," Clara said carefully. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said quickly. That's not what this is. I'm asking if you would consider staying on as a proper housekeeper. Paid. With a real agreement, written down, the way things should be done. Your own room, fair wages, and no obligation beyond what the work requires." Clara turned back to the sink. She stood there with her hands in the cooling water and looked at the frost on the window, which was thinner tonight, the warmth finally making ground. "You could still leave if it isn't right," he said. "I'd never hold you to anything that wasn't working for you. But I'd like you to consider it before you get on that coach." She didn't answer right away. She stood at the sink and thought about the laundry she'd put away this afternoon, the easy way she'd move through the house, knowing where everything was. She thought about Cole in the chair and what he'd said about his mother. She thought about Jesse's nod of seriousness this morning and Ruth making coffee. She thought about the fact that she had stopped dreaming about Thomas Harding's door closing. "What do you want, Clara?" she asked herself in the quiet of her own mind. Not what is safe. Not what makes sense. What do you actually want? She pulled her hands out of the water and dried them on the kitchen cloth and turned around. "I have 3 conditions," she said. Eli looked at her. "First, the arrangement is written down formally, like you said. Not just a gentleman's agreement. Paper, signed, with terms that protect both of us." "Agreed," he said. "Second, if it isn't working, either one of us can say so, and I'll leave within the week with a fair wage for time already served. No arguments, no hard feelings." "Agreed." She looked at him steadily. "Third, this is not a backdoor arrangement. If I'm working in this house, it's a respectable situation, and if anyone from town has something to say about it, we address it directly and openly. No hiding, no apologizing for the fact of my being here." Eli looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face went from careful to settled. The look of a man who had asked a question and gotten an answer that was better than he expected, and was quietly adjusting to that fact. "Agreed," he said. Clara nodded once. "Then I'll think about it tonight and give you my answer in the morning." Eli said, "Fair enough." She went to bed. She sat on the edge of the mattress in the small room at the end of the hall and put her face in her hands for a minute. Not crying, just allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had just been offered and what it would mean to accept it. She thought about her mother's house in Missouri, about the particular smell of her husband's workshop, about the folded advertisement she had burned in the stove her first night here, and what she had been trying to burn along with it. She thought about what it cost to want something again after you had stopped letting yourself. Down the hall, she could hear the sounds of the house, the stove settling, the wind moving, somewhere the faint sound of a child's deep breathing. Jesse or Cole, both of them sleeping safely in the house their father had built and was trying to hold together. She lay down. She stared at the ceiling. She already knew her answer. She had known it, she realized, since the moment she'd said, "This is not her home," in the hallway this afternoon, and felt the wrongness of that sentence in her chest before she'd finished thinking it. But she made herself wait until morning anyway, because she had promised herself a long time ago that she would never make the most important decisions of her life in the dark. Some things deserve the daylight. She was up before the sun again, not because she couldn't sleep this time. She had slept, deeply and without dreaming. The kind of sleep that comes when the body finally believes it is somewhere safe. She was up because the answer was already in her chest when she opened her eyes. Clear and steady. And she didn't want to spend another hour in bed pretending she was still deciding. She dressed in the dark. She went to the kitchen. She built the fire up from the overnight coals and put the coffee on, and stood at the window while the sky outside went from black to the deep blue that came just before dawn. The frost on the glass was thinner again. The storm had broken in the night, and the world outside was still and white and very, very quiet. She heard Eli before she saw him. The back door, the sound of his boots, the particular rhythm of a man who had been up for a while already. He came into the kitchen, still cold from the outside, stopped when he saw her, and looked at the coffee. "You're up early," he said.
"So are you."
Barn needed checking. He hung his coat. Storm broke clean overnight. Road should be passable by afternoon.
"I know," Clara said. He poured a cup of coffee and stood at the other end of the counter. He did not ask the question yet. He was giving her the room to say it in her own time, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he operated. He asked a thing once, and then he waited, because he believed people deserved the space to answer without being pushed into it. She turned from the window and looked at him directly. "Yes," she said. He looked at her over his coffee cup. "Your 3 conditions," she said. "I want to add a 4th. He waited. "I want to be introduced to the town properly," she said. "Not as Tom Harding's mail-order woman who ended up at the Calloway ranch by accident. As Clara Whitfield, housekeeper for the Calloway family, hired formally and operating under a written agreement." She paused. "I won't hide, and I won't be explained away. If I'm going to be here, I'm here." Eli set his cup down. "I can do that." "Harold Briggs will have something to say."
"Harold Briggs has something to say about everything," Eli said. "That doesn't mean anything he says is worth listening to." "It matters to how people treat me in this town," Clara said. "I'm not asking you to fight my battles. I'm asking you to stand beside me publicly, so the town understands this is a legitimate arrangement with your family's full knowledge and approval." "You already have my mother's approval," he said, "which is considerably harder to get than mine." "I know that," Clara said, "but the town doesn't know that yet." Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Saturday is market day. I take the boys into town every 2 weeks for supplies, and Ruth comes when her hands are up to it." He looked at her steadily. "Come with us on Saturday, all of us together. Anyone who has a question can ask it to my face." Clara held his gaze. "All right," she said. "Saturday." They shook hands across the kitchen counter. Not a romantic gesture, not a dramatic one. Just 2 adults making an agreement in the early morning over a kitchen counter with the coffee going and the fire catching and the rest of the house still asleep. It was practical and honest, and it meant exactly what it appeared to mean, which Clara found more reassuring than any amount of ceremony would have been. Ruth came down 20 minutes later and found them both at the table and the coffee already made, and a plate of biscuits covered with a cloth in the center of the table. She looked at Clara. She looked at Eli. She sat down and poured her coffee and said, without looking at either of them, "Well, good." That was all. It was, Clara was learning, exactly enough. The boys came down together, and Jesse knew immediately that something had changed. He had his father's instinct for the emotional temperature of a room, just without his father's capacity for containing it. He looked from Clara to Eli to his grandmother and said, "Did something happen?" "Miss Whitfield is staying on," Eli said. "She's going to be helping with the house, and with you two, on a proper arrangement." Jesse's face went through approximately 6 emotions in 4 seconds, landing on something that looked like vindication. "I knew it," he said. "You didn't know anything," Cole said, settling carefully into his chair. He was still moving slowly from the illness, but his color was good, and his eyes were sharp. He looked at Clara. "Are you actually staying?" "Yes," Clara said. Cole nodded once, with the gravity of a person whose approval had been hard-won and who was now extending it formally. "Good," he said. It was the same word Ruth had used, and in the same tone, and Clara understood that Cole came by it honestly. Jesse reached across and grabbed 2 biscuits with both hands and said, with his mouth already full, "Can we get a dog?" "That has nothing to do with this conversation," Eli said. "I'm just asking while everyone's in a good mood," Jesse said. Ruth put her hand over her mouth. Clara looked very carefully at her biscuit.
Eli looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had accepted that this was his life and had made a certain peace with it. The morning went forward with a lightness that Clara hadn't felt in the house before. Not that it had been heavy, exactly, but there had been a provisional quality to everything, the feeling of a household holding its breath. Now something had exhaled. The boys were louder. Ruth moved through the kitchen with less tension in her shoulders. Even the sounds of the ranch outside seemed different. Tom Greer was whistling somewhere near the barn, which Clara had not heard him do before. She spent the morning going through the household accounts with Ruth, because Ruth had asked her to, and because understanding the real financial picture of the household was part of doing the job properly. Ruth walked her through it with the directness of a woman who had kept those accounts for years and was genuinely relieved to share the weight. It was while they were at the table, with the account ledger between them, that Ruth said, without looking up from the page, "Her name was Margaret." Clara went still. "Eli's wife," Ruth said. "Margaret Grace Calloway, born Margaret Sutton. She was from a farm family outside Laramie. Practical woman, sharp. Loved those boys before they were even born." Ruth turned a page. "She died on the 2nd of January, 1882. Cole was born fine. She was gone within the hour." Clara said nothing. "Eli blamed himself for 2 years," Ruth said. "Still does, some days. He thinks if he'd gotten the doctor sooner, or made different decisions, or—" She stopped. Men do that. They try to turn tragedy into something they could have prevented, because that feels better than accepting that some things just happen. She looked at Clara now. "I'm telling you this because you should know it, not because I want you to fix it. A woman can't fix a man's grief. She can only be present while he works through it himself." "I know that," Clara said quietly. "I thought you might." Ruth looked back at the ledger. She would have liked you, Margaret. She had no patience for women who performed weakness they didn't feel. And she would have said the same thing to Harding's face and not lost a step. Clara felt something press behind her eyes and blinked it back firmly. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." Ruth said, "Don't make it sentimental. I'm just giving you information that's relevant to the household." "Of course," Clara said. Ruth almost smiled. Turn to April. The feed costs are where we're bleeding. They worked through the accounts for another hour, and by the end of it, Clara had 3 pages of notes and a clear picture of where the ranch's problems were and what could be done about them from the household side. And Ruth had the particular satisfaction of a woman who had handed a heavy thing to someone strong enough to carry it. Saturday came cold and bright. The sky, a hard Wyoming blue with no clouds in it. The roads had been passable since Wednesday, and by Saturday they were well-traveled and clean. Eli brought the wagon around, and Ruth climbed in with the boys. And then he came to the porch where Clara was pulling on her coat, and offered his hand for the step up. She took it and climbed up without making anything of it, because it was simply a practical courtesy on an icy step. And they were both practical people. But she noticed that he didn't release her hand immediately, and she noticed that she didn't move away immediately. And they were both aware of that single extra second before they both moved on without remarking on it. Jessie, who noticed everything, said absolutely nothing, which was so unusual that Cole looked at him to check if he was ill. Coldwater Creek on a Saturday morning was busy in the compressed, specific way of small western towns in winter. Everyone who needed to be there was there, doing what they needed to do, and everyone was watching everything else while pretending not to. Clara felt the attention the moment Eli drove the wagon down the main road. She felt it without flinching, which was the only response that would serve her. Eli parked near the general store and helped Ruth down, and then the boys. And then he offered his hand to Clara again, and she stepped down
and they walked into Harold Briggs' store together, all 5 of them, in the unremarkable manner of a family doing its Saturday business. Briggs was behind the counter. 2 other women were at the dry goods shelf. A man Clara didn't know was reading notices near the door. All 4 of them looked up when the Calloway family walked in. "Harold," Eli said pleasantly. "Morning." Briggs nodded. His eyes moved to Clara. Eli said, without any particular emphasis, "You know Miss Clara Whitfield. She's taken on as housekeeper for the household. Ruth's hands have been giving her trouble, and we needed the help." He said it the way you said something true that required no defense, plainly, and then he moved on. "We'll need 50 pounds of flour today, the salt pork if you have it, and Ruth has a list." Briggs looked at Clara for a moment, and Clara looked back at him with the same level expression she had used in the yard the previous week. She was not apologizing, and she was not performing confidence. She was simply there, standing in the store, present in the way of someone who had as much right to be there as anyone else. One of the women at the dry goods shelf, a round-faced woman in a green coat who Clara didn't know, said, "Are you the one who kept the Calloway boys through the storm?" "I helped where I could," Clara said. "My daughter's the widow Pearson's neighbor," the woman said. "She told me about your situation when you arrived. The business with Tom Harding." She paused and looked at Clara directly. "I want to say that was a sorry business, and not everyone in this town thinks Harold's way about it." Briggs made a sound. "I appreciate that," Clara said. "Truly." The woman extended her hand. "Eleanor Marsh. My husband's the doctor." Clara shook it. "Doctor." Marsh treated Cole during the fever. "I'm grateful for his advice." Eleanor Marsh nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had arrived at an accurate opinion and found it confirmed. "You come find me if you need anything. A woman new to town needs at least one person who will tell her the truth." "I'll remember that," Clara said. She could feel Eli beside her, not hovering, not intervening, just present. And she understood that this was what she had asked for on the morning she'd given her answer. Not someone to fight her battles. Someone to stand beside her so the town understood the ground she was standing on was solid. Briggs processed the order in near silence. The man by the door had found something very interesting in the notices. The other woman at the dry goods shelf, who had not introduced herself and had watched the whole exchange with a particular expression of someone storing information for later use, eventually went back to her shopping. Jessie found a jar of hard candy and brought it to Eli with the practiced expression of a child who understood that Saturday was when the answer was more likely to be yes. Eli bought the candy, gave each boy 2 pieces, and gave the jar to Clara to put in the basket, which Jessie observed with the quiet satisfaction of a successful operation. Cole walked beside Clara on the way back to the wagon. He didn't hold her hand this time. He was 6, and he was in public, and he had his dignity. But he walked close enough that their arms were nearly touching, which was, from Cole, the same thing. The drive home was different from every other drive Clara had taken in her life, in a way she found difficult to name. She sat on the wagon bench with the winter sun on her face, and the boys talking in the back, and Ruth making occasional dry remarks about Eleanor Marsh's taste in hats. And Eli drove with the easy competence of a man on a road he'd traveled 10,000 times, and the land around them was wide and white and quiet and enormous. She was not safe in the way she'd spent 3 years trying to construct safety. The cautious, solitary safety of a woman who trusted no one far enough to be hurt by them. She was something else. She was planted. She was in ground that had accepted her. She did not look at Eli. She looked at the road ahead of them, at the hills with their caps of snow, at the pale sky. He said quietly, so the boys wouldn't hear, "You did well in there." "We did fine," she said. He accepted the correction without comment. They drove.
The ranch came into view as the light was going gold in the mid-afternoon. The familiar shape of it, the barn, the bunkhouse, the long wooden house with the smoke from the chimney going straight up in the still air. Clara looked at it and felt the thing she had been refusing to let herself feel for days. The thing she had been managing and containing and keeping at careful arm's length. She felt home. Not the home she'd had before. Not the Kansas City house that had been hers, and then her husband's, and then Grief's. Not the Missouri winter with its borrowed rooms and its taking in of other people's laundry. Something forward-facing. Something she had not walked into by accident, but had chosen, condition by condition, with her eyes open. Eli helped Ruth down from the wagon, and she went inside with the boys. He came back to where Clara was unloading the supply basket, and took the heavy end without being asked. They carried it inside together. Ruth was already starting the kettle.
Jesse was telling Cole a story about something he'd seen through Briggs' window that involved a cat and a wheel of cheese and was growing more elaborate by the sentence. Cole was listening with the contained attention that meant he would remember this story word for word and repeat it to Jesse at the worst possible moment. Clara set the basket on the counter and looked at the kitchen, the fire, the worn table, the mending basket by Ruth's chair, the boys' boots muddy by the back door, the sound of a working household at the end of a good day. And she stood very still for just a moment. Eli came in behind her and hung his coat and hat. He looked at her standing there. "All right," he said. She turned around. Her voice was steady and her eyes were clear, and she meant what she said with everything she had. "Yes," she said. "I'm all right." And the words settled into the kitchen like the warmth from the stove. Not dramatic, not sudden, but real. The kind of warmth that reached all the way into the cold places and stayed there. The boys were laughing about the cat and the cheese. Ruth was pouring tea. Outside, Tom Greer was closing up the barn for the night. The sky through the window was going pink and orange at the edge of the hills. The kind of western sunset that looked like the land itself was catching fire from the inside. And Clara Whitfield, who had been thrown out of one life with nothing but a suitcase and $3 and the back end of a broken promise, stood in the kitchen of the Calloway ranch and understood, without needing to say it aloud, that she had not arrived here by accident. She had arrived here by every hard choice she'd ever made, every door she'd walked away from with her head up, every morning she'd gotten up and done the necessary thing, when the easier thing was to stop trying. The road from Missouri had not taken her where she expected. It had taken her somewhere better. It had taken her somewhere true. And Clara May Whitfield, who had learned the hard way that belonging was not given but built from biscuits and mending baskets and mustard plasters and knives with loose pins, and children who watched you from doorways until they decided you were worth knowing, put her hands on the kitchen counter and got to work. She was home, and this time she intended to stay.